Congressman Dave Min went directly after Interior Secretary Doug Burgum in a fiery hearing clash over renewable energy, skyrocketing electricity prices, and a controversial $1 billion payout tied to offshore wind projects. The moment tensions exploded came when Min repeatedly pressed Burgum with one question. Is that not true?
Gentlemen, time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Min, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Westerman, Ranking Member Huffman, for holding this hearing. Thank you, Secretary, for coming back before this committee. In 2024, then-candidate Donald Trump campaigned on cutting energy costs, promising to cut utility rates in half in his first 12 months in office. We are now about 16 months in, and residential electricity rates are at a 10-year high in the United States. Meanwhile, your department has refused to approve hundreds of wind and solar permits, preventing nearly 57 gigawatts of new energy from coming online, energy that could power millions of homes. In July of last year, the Department of the Interior announced it would require all wind and solar permits, nearly 70 types of permits, to be personally approved by you. But your department has effectively rejected every one of those applications to date. In fact, in April of this year, a U.S. District Court judge ruled in favor of clean energy project developers, agreeing that your department was, quote, slow-walking the approval of wind and solar permits against the law and issued a preliminary injunction against your department. Now, Secretary, I have reviewed your past testimony, and I would say it seems very clear you have a vendetta against renewable energy, a vendetta that you're making clear again today. You've stated, for example, that we, quote, have to have massive taxpayer subsidies to produce renewable energies because once the working families tax cut bill was passed last year and the subsidies ended, most of these renewable energy projects dropped off the queue. And in fact, that's a false statement. In fact, at the end of 2025, the queue for renewable solar, wind, and storage was over 6 times larger than that for gas. I would also note that if we're talking about subsidies for energy, some might say that the $75 billion and counting that we are paying right now for this illegal war in Iran is a direct subsidy for oil and gas, much larger than for renewables, along with the billions that we spend each year in the Middle East to maintain military bases. But I digress. I also want to point out that you once described wind and solar as unreliable, intermittent energy projects that hold America back from achieving U.S. energy dominance. Now, again, I would say this is a false statement because advancements in energy storage, innovation, including batteries and long-duration storage, have allowed us to deal increasingly effectively with the energy variability of renewables while getting Americans the energy they need. But speaking of U.S. energy dominance, Secretary, I just ask you a simple yes-no question. Do you agree that China is also trying to achieve total energy dominance? Yes, no? Okay, that's not a yes-no. I'll reclaim my time. Do you know how much new energy China put online last year? New energy.
Intermittent or baseload?
And all energy. 543 gigawatts. Do you know how much of that was renewable?
I do not know how much of it did not operate.
434 gigawatts. 80%,
but only when the wind is blowing.
80%. They put on 434 gigawatts annually. 80% of the new energy that they put online last year was renewable. 80%. You don't have to take my word for it. I'm Asian, so I'm good at math, but you can look that up. 80% of the energy they put up was renewable. Meanwhile, the United States, under your, quote, total energy dominance strategy of rejecting renewable energy, put up 53 gigawatts of new energy last year. Less than 10% of what China put up. Now, your clear bias against renewable energy in the face of all evidence is harming our national security, harming our ability to have energy independence, and putting us further and further behind the Chinese. And the cancellation of Total Energy's offshore wind leases last year is a case study on your department's economically illiterate and unlawful energy strategy. In March 2026, Trump settled with Total Energies, a French oil company, for $1 billion in exchange for cancellation of its offshore wind leases. If completed, Total Energies projects would have produced enough energy to power 1.7 million homes in the United States. Furthermore, the administration paid this company $1 billion again from a fund strictly reserved for settlements resulting in active or imminent litigation requiring monetary compensation, which was not the case with Total, because in fact, in March 2026, the CEO of Total told CNBC that their company had approached the federal government for reimbursement after Trump had paused all offshore wind permitting. So again, a simple yes-no question for you. While constituents deal with sky-high utility prices, do you think it's appropriate that your department sent $1 billion to a foreign oil company to stop producing energy?
There are so many things that you said that are false or misleading. I don't know where to start, but I will start with one thing, that Total was refunded their money. They essentially gave the U.S. government a interest-free loan, and their money was refunded to them.
I know you've described this as a refund in the past. I'm not interested in semantics. You gave them $1 billion to stop producing energy.
It's not semantics.
It is semantics. You gave $1 billion out of a fund reserved for settlements. Is that not true? You gave them $1 billion out of a fund reserved for legal settlements.
I didn't give them anything. We refunded their money, but only if
you gave them $1 billion, right? How are you going to characterize it?
Which they've already invested in energy.
I'll reclaim my time. Thank you very much.
They've already invested that money in energy projects in the U.S.
Your department conducted a cost-benefit analysis before engaging in this refund.
Gentleman's time has expired.
This hearing became one of the sharpest confrontations yet over America's energy future, and it exposed the growing divide between the Trump administration's energy agenda and lawmakers' pushing for aggressive renewable expansion. Congressman Dave Min came into this hearing armed with statistics, court rulings, and a very clear strategy. Portrayed Doug Burgum and the administration as actively sabotaging renewable energy projects while Americans struggle with rising electricity bills. And from the very beginning, Min framed the debate around one core political problem. Donald Trump promised to slash energy prices, but utility costs are still climbing. That's an important political vulnerability because energy costs hit every household directly. Americans may not follow congressional hearings every day, but they absolutely notice higher electric bills. Min argued that the administration's policies are making the situation worse by blocking hundreds of wind and solar permits that could bring massive amounts of new energy online. According to his argument, the administration is intentionally slowing renewable growth even as demand for electricity keeps rising. But what made this exchange especially intense was that Min wasn't simply debating ideology. He accused the department of acting unlawfully. He referenced a federal judge ruling that allegedly found the Interior Department was slow-walking renewable energy permits illegally. That's a serious accusation because it shifts the debate from politics into potential abuse of regulatory authority. Then came the bigger geopolitical argument. Min repeatedly pointed to China's rapid expansion of renewable energy, arguing that the United States is falling dangerously behind in what he described as a global race for energy dominance. And politically, that's a very strategic line of attack. China is one of the few issues that generates bipartisan concern in Washington. So instead of framing renewables purely as climate policy, Min reframed them as a national security issue. His argument was essentially this: China is aggressively scaling renewable infrastructure while the United States is slowing itself down through political fights. That allowed Min to position renewable energy not as a progressive environmental project, but as a strategic economic and geopolitical competition. Doug Burgum, however, kept returning to a familiar conservative counterargument: reliability.